with your Vestry service. I've had the honor and privilege of being president of ECF for the past 8 years. And prior to that, I spent close to 20 years in various leadership roles at both the congregational and diocesan level. And a lot of those were years of service on vestries and finance committees and property committees and personnel committees and 2 search committees. And I vowed to myself I'd rather have open heart surgery without anesthesia than ever serve on another search committee. But when I came to ECF, I looked back at my leadership positions at the congregational level and said, you know, it was really important work. But often when you serve on a vestry, especially in a smaller congregation or in a geographically isolated area, you do feel as though your problems and issues are unique. And as we put together these presentations on vestry leadership, whether it was the one on Monday or tonight, what we're trying to do is to give you some thoughts and ideas and for you to realize that what you're doing is incredibly important spiritual leadership for a local faith community, and that you're not alone, and that a lot of the challenges and opportunities and problems you're facing, whether you're in a big urban parish or a small rural congregation, are similar, if not identical, to your colleagues throughout the country and throughout the world. And I think that is the beauty and joy of doing these web conferences, because you do get to share your thoughts and ideas and hopes and dreams and best practices with your colleagues throughout the church. So we hope that what we present to you today will be helpful, will be provocative, will give you some ideas on how you might better become the leaders of your local faith communities. So thanks again for being here.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Brendan Hunter. I'm the Assistant Program Director for Leadership Resources here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. Before we get started, we just wanted to get a sense of everybody here gathered this evening with 2 quick questions, 2 quick polls. So the first one has come up here. I just wanted to know whether or not you're able to be with us for part 1 of Vestry Leadership 101, which was just this past Monday. To let you know, everybody who signed up for part 1 and for part 2 will be getting an email by the end of this week that will have a link to the recording of both of these web conferences, as well as a copy of the slides that you see this evening and what were also used on part 1 on Monday. So to see, looks like a good amount of you were able to be there with us before, and some of you are just coming in for part 2, so we'll bear that in mind. We can bring up the next poll. And for our next question, we just want to see, how focused is your vestry on the mission and vision of your congregation? So just want to quickly get a sense of that. You can click on there. Hopefully y'all know what your mission statement and vision statements are. If not, we have that option for you as well. Okay, well, I'm glad to see that not too many of you are not focused on it at all, but a bit of a mixed bag. Most of you kind of are somewhere in between. Great, so that's good to know, to kind of get a sense of where everybody's at. We'll bear that in mind for this evening. So moving on, part 1 was really focused on the basic essentials of terms, definitions, looking at who's who and what's what, and what makes up vestry and how vestry functions. For part 2, we're looking at moving on from sort of the day-to-day sort of responding to things, and instead being a proactive vestry that is a mission-focused vestry, as we were saying. And so, as you can see here, our format for this evening, we're looking at the 2 priorities that we see for mission-focused vestries, and then looking at each of those components in terms of how and what makes a vestry have a shared sense of purpose, and how you can build up the people within your congregation and how to strengthen those who are already leaders in your congregation for mission-focused service. Do know that at any point this evening, if you have any questions, we will have a couple of points where we'll pause to take questions, but please, if you, especially for those of you who are just joining, there's a chat box just to the left-hand side of your screen. Please enter your comments, questions. Miguel and I will be monitoring the chat box, and we'll be sure to note those and bring those up when we do pause for questions, so please take advantage of that as well. And without further ado, I'll hand this over to Donald.
Thank you very much. And even for those of you who were not able to join us on Monday, this is a self-contained workshop that will be relevant whether or not you attended Monday night. I guess the purpose of tonight's presentation is to move from kind of the nuts and bolts of the business aspect of being a vestry to what we're calling a more mission-focused vestry. And they're basically two components or two major tasks associated with that. One is building a shared sense of purpose, and the other is strengthening leadership capacity. And actually, those are two components of a type of leadership we advocate here at ECF known as transformational leadership. And the first component basically is rallying your congregation around a shared mission, assuring people that even in tough times, obstacles could be overcome, and articulating a compelling vision for the future. And we're going to talk about mission versus vision and how you manifest that in a local faith community. And the other is how you strengthen leadership capacity, because all current leaders, I think, have an obligation to develop new leaders for the future. And we're going to come up with some practical ideas and concepts around how you can do that in an appropriate way, including discerning the gifts of new leaders and coaching and mentoring them as they move forward. But let me just give you a couple examples, and these can be found, these come from Vital Practices articles, and Miguel will be showing you the links to those at some point. But it just gives you a little idea on how you move to this next level of a mission-focused vestry. There is a church called St. Matthew's in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they decided that they wanted to kind of move beyond the kind of canonical day-to-day responsibilities of being a vestry into more of a spiritual discernment model of being a vestry. And they did it in a fairly kind of simple way. They decided to focus 20 minutes of their meeting on prayer and Bible study and Bible reflection, and use the Bible text and the Bible studies as a jumping off period to address some of the so-called business functions of the vestry, including developing a budget. The other thing they did that I think is very interesting is that the type of people they chose to be elected to the vestry were people who had kind of the big picture in mind. And they decided to form a management team separate and apart from the vestry that dealt with issues like property and finance and some of the nuts and bolts issues so that the vestry could focus on some of the big picture issues. Now, clearly, I realize that this model doesn't work in all congregations, especially if you're a smaller congregation. But I think the lesson here is, what kinds of mechanisms do you use so that the vestry has the time and the capacity to focus on big picture issues while still dealing with their fiduciary responsibilities? The other thing is how a vestry strengthens its leadership capacity. And I think sometimes out of frustration or out of lack of time, sometimes we're only looking for kind of warm bodies, and we'll say, well, John is retired. He has time to serve on the vestry, or Shirley is one of our biggest givers, one of the biggest pledgers in the congregation. Let's put her on the vestry. And we have a link for this other article, building a healthy vestry, on kind of appropriate processes to discern new leadership and to help people figure out whether or not vestry service is appropriate for them. And we'll talk more about discernment later on in this presentation. But these are kind of two practical how-to articles based on two experiences of vestries who are trying to move from just being a business-related vestry to a mission-based vestry.
Great. So we just went over, as Donald noted, the two kind of main priorities that are going to be the kind of structure for tonight's web conference. So if any of you have questions at this moment about the overall kind of what these two priorities are or how they might play out in your congregation, please feel free to enter them into the chat box so we can clarify. We want to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page before we move into kind of detailing each of these two priorities. So I'm going to take a moment to just see if anyone has a question.
And again, as I go through my presentation, please type in any questions you have, and I'll try to either incorporate them into the presentation, or Miguel and Brendan will make sure I address them at the appropriate time.
Right.
But maybe at the moment, I know there's one probably in process, but maybe we can kind of move forward with the next phase, and I will try to address your questions as we move forward.
Okay.
Yes, one is a question about small congregations with resources. We will address that. So back to the issue of building a shared purpose, and we talked about a shared mission and a hopeful vision. And we often use the word mission and vision all the time, both in church circles and even in a not-for-profit and even in the for-profit community. But I think when we talk about mission and vision in our presentation and in all our materials, we have specific definitions that we want to talk about so that we can all be on the same page.
Yeah.
So mission, we often talk about what is your mission, what is a mission statement. And basically, mission statements are operational descriptors of what you're doing. A mission statement basically should be about what it is you're doing now to live into what God is calling you to do. And, sometimes vestries will spend lots and lots of time trying to craft the perfect mission statement. And like any kind of statement, sometimes the perfect mission statement is not necessarily the important part of the process. What's important is having ongoing conversations about mission. What is God calling you to do? Wrestling with, as a local Episcopal faith community in a particular time and place, what is it that we ought to do or should do or feel God is calling us to do, especially in light of our unique contextual situation? Because like politics, all ministry is contextual. And I think the mistake we make in the Episcopal Church is that we feel we need to be all things to all people, and every congregation, large and small, needs to do everything for everybody. I think an important part of mission is what you don't do as well. And to give you an example, this is an example of a mission statement. St. Mary's gathers to glorify Christ, form new disciples, and serve the poor. And here in St. Mary's context, serving the poor is an part of their mission because of their unique context. You know, it's also important to know what you're not going to do. For example, if you happen to be in a rural, isolated part of the country, doing inner city ministry may not be what you are called to do or what is the context for doing your ministry. I was at a church in Southwest Florida recently that was located in a community, basically an area of gated elderly community complexes. And for some reason, they felt that they needed to have an active church school program. Even though no one ever showed up for church school, they had a church school teacher on call just in case that young family with young children showed up. And on one hand, I kind of commend them for their, for their energy and enthusiasm, but perhaps that particular congregation was not called to do youth ministry. So I think part of it is what do you do and what do you not do, which a lot of people think is not necessarily a component of their mission. You know, let me use ECF as an example, and part of it is not that we have the perfect mission statement, but when I came 8 years ago, we were doing a lot of different things, and they were all important, and they were all interesting, and they all were serving the church in some capacity. But we as a staff and a board decided that we really needed to focus on what was the role of ECF as an independent lay-led organization, given the needs in the church, given our capacity, and given our core expertise. And we decided that our mission was to strengthen leadership and financial capacity. And as Miguel went through at the beginning, we decided what are the core programs and strategies for living into that mission. The other thing we also had to decide was what we weren't going to do. Given the fact that our mission was to strengthen leadership and financial capacity, what were the programs we were doing that did not fulfill that mission? And it was somewhat of a painful process because we had to decide that programs that people felt were important and vital needed to be discarded or shed so that we can focus on our core mission. We have what we call a strategy screen, which when we have new opportunities or new programs, we have to run it through the screen to see whether or not it fulfills our mission. And the strategy screen are things like, do we have the capacity to do it? Is it sustainable? Are we duplicating what other organizations are doing? Parishes have to do the same, because if you are going to live into your mission of being the body of Christ known as the Episcopal Church in a particular time and place, you really need to focus on what are you going to do as well as what you're not going to do. So what is the difference between mission and vision? Mission, as I said, is what you're currently doing, what you feel God is calling you to do. And vision is picturing a hopeful future. Basically, your vision or your vision statement would be, what would the world look like, or what would your faith community look like if you actively engaged in your mission for a period of time? And visioning is a very hopeful and forward-thinking exercise. And it's also an incredible way of engaging the congregation in looking forward to the future. Because if you have a hopeful vision for the future as a local faith community, You have a hopeful faith. You have a basically you feel that you continue to serve an important, vital role in your community and will be here long after the current leadership moves on. So one of the things that's important is you listen for common themes. And visioning could be a very dynamic exercise, and it's a way of engaging people, members of your congregation, in determining what the future of this congregation is. And through that process, you start you start kind of building consensus around what this future vision may look like. And obviously, the vision needs to support the mission, and it needs to be contextual. The questions that seem to be coming up is, how long does it take? How long does it take to change the culture of a vestry or a congregation? And it takes time. I'm not going to say that this could be done overnight, and that's why you need to take small steps. Just like that small step of the vestry that we have the link story to, where they decided to spend more time on Bible study. The other thing is we often have this kind of fantasy of the golden age of the past. I know there's some people say, I know there's one senior warden, elderly senior warden has said, if this parish had a golden age, I must have missed it. I think we have to honor the past, especially those of us who come from congregations with long and rich histories. But mission and vision is not dwelling in the past. It's using the past as part of your experiential ministry to help determine what God is calling you to do now as you articulate a vision for the future. So, for example, back to some vision statements. St. Mary's will be alive with the sound of children and families once again. Or St. Michael's will be reconnected to its neighborhood, living out Christ's mission to serve those who are most in need. Here are two examples of taking a mission statement of what you're doing now and what you hope living into that mission is going to result in after a period of time. Yeah, I like that. The golden age lasted 15 minutes in the middle of the night. This is just, again, Miguel's going to give you the link to this Vital Practices story. This is St. Mary's Mariposa, which is a densely populated neighborhood in Los Angeles. And like a lot of urban neighborhoods, the members of the congregation come from other parts of the city and the suburbs. And they were trying to figure out what was the future of that congregation. And they did a very simple thing. They did a photo project one Saturday afternoon. They were sent out in groups of 2 to 4 with cameras, and they were told, within an hour or two to just take pictures of things in their neighborhood that they felt either were representative or compelling or interesting or entertaining or amusing. And then they basically did a slideshow of all the pictures that people took over the period of time. And they found, and it led to incredible results. First of all, they thought that the neighborhood was predominantly African American, when indeed it was basically overwhelmingly Latino. They thought that there were recreational opportunities for young people throughout the neighborhood, when they found through the pictures that there really were very few playground or recreational sports opportunities available. And they came back and they really decided that they needed to come up with a mission and programs that directly related to needs in the neighborhood. And they also realized that their vestry needed to reflect the demographics of the neighborhood, and they were able to elect their first Latina member of the vestry. Now, this is a small step. Obviously they weren't able to totally change the mission or vision of the congregation overnight, but through the simple act of going around the neighborhood with cameras, they realized that they were serving a particular purpose in a particular time and place. Beverly here, she's saying a strong rector and strong leadership can accomplish amazing things. And I think one of the things we have to look at, when we advocate for this mission-based vestry, we're talking about a strong partnership between the rector or priest in charge and the vestry. And traditionally we had this dichotomy where the priest was responsible for spiritual matters and the vestry was responsible for kind of the business aspects of the church. And what we're in essence advocating is more of a blurred line. And I use blurred in a positive sense, more of, I guess, a mosaic, where the vestry in partnership with the rector or priest in charge or vicar are jointly responsible for the mission and ministry and spiritual health of the community. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't have specific roles and responsibilities, where clearly the rector or the priest has sacramental roles and canonical roles, as does a vestry. But it's an interdependent, dynamic relationship where the vestry and the lay leaders in partnership with the priest bring about, fulfill the mission, help articulate a vision, and tend to both the spiritual and temporal needs of the local faith community. Now, when we do this workshop in local communities, we'll have people kind of break up in groups to discuss these questions. But these are the types of questions you should ask yourself as you seek to move to this more mission-based role of vestries and leadership. What do you believe God is calling your church to do? How would you describe your How would you describe what your congregation does to someone who has never visited your church? Are there programs that you're currently doing that you feel out of place with with the sense of your church's mission? Why or why not? Now, one of the questions that came up was, we're a small congregation with limited resources. That clearly indicates that you have to be very, very targeted and focused on what you do. Now, clearly you want to minister to the needs of the members, so there are sacramental needs and pastoral care needs and fellowship needs. But if you're only tending to the needs of your immediate community, you are not engaged in God's mission in the world. And that is a chaplaincy, and that may be appropriate. It may be appropriate for your unique context, but I will argue that unless you're engaged in mission in the world beyond your four walls, you are not going to be a thriving, vibrant, vital congregation, and you might not be able to articulate a vision. Now, you may be in that place in your development as a congregation where that is your mission and vision. Your mission is to serve as to support your current members of your congregation. And your vision is that at some point, the congregation is going to come to an end and people are going to move on. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is if you're going to decide that, you need to decide that in a deliberate, thoughtful, prayerful way. And as you picture a hopeful future, what is your personal vision of your church's future? And how do you determine that collectively? And how do you begin to create a shared vision of the future? One of the roles of good leaders and transformational leaders is not that they set the direction of the church, but they start articulating some ideas based on what they're hearing, and they help develop a consensus for a shared vision. Because unless it's a shared vision, and when I'm talking about a shared vision, it's shared between the priest and the lay leadership. It's shared between this partnership leadership and the wider and the internal worshiping community. And at some point, it's shared between the worshiping community and the wider neighborhood and community. And when that happens, that's an incredible dynamic. And that's when the congregation really is connected to itself. It's connected to its immediate neighborhood and community. And more importantly, it's connected to God. So let's stop here and see if there are any questions or comments on what I'm saying so far.
Okay. There have been some. Hi, Donald. This is Miguel. There have been a lot of really good questions and comments, which I've been noting. One of the questions which we sort of touched upon in part one of this, but maybe we want to talk about it just now, is someone noted that there's a sense that the vestry should run like any other business. It should be the board of like any other business. And if you could just speak to how being a mission-focused vestry makes that different.
Yeah, and it is different. And there are business aspects to being a congregation, but congregations are not small businesses. They are the body of Christ at a local level. And I guess what we're saying is you need to tend to the business affairs of the congregation, but the vestry should be the discernment, the strategic, the mission, the spiritually focused body. And for those people who love to deal with property issues or love to crunch numbers or love to do some of those kind of nuts and bolts things, like that parish we mentioned in the Vital Practices article, they may be called to do those kinds of tasks. But the types of people you want on your vestry, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, are the people who have a big picture sense of what the role of the vestry is and what the congregation is called to do. And so you're looking at, when you're recruiting vestry people, whether you're a large congregation or small congregation, you want people who kind of get it, who understand that this is not being on the board of directors of the local YMCA or development organization or Planned Parenthood or any of those other organizations. It's people who have their own, who are on their own faith journeys and want to help guide and direct other people on their faith journeys and help call the congregation to a sense of what God is calling it to do and be, not only now, but in the future.
Great.
Other questions? It's both and. But when you're looking at vestry members, if you have the choice between someone who's a number cruncher with no sense of mission and vision and someone who may not be the biggest number cruncher but has a sense of mission and vision, you make the number cruncher the treasurer, and the person with mission and vision you put on the vestry. And if you're a small, tiny congregation with 30 people, you may have a vestry of 3 people. And you may have to kind of find other people to do some of the nuts and bolts work. But more and more I'm convinced we're not going to grow the church through balance sheets. We're going to grow the church through active involvement in our own communities and in the wider world.
So a few questions and I think a few comments continue to kind of bring us back to this, which is, what are some first steps? What are some initial ways in which to start getting at the mission and vision? And Donald, I'm sure you have an insight. I think one of the reasons why we began with all these questions, with the series of questions, and I'll go back to them, for vestries to consider, is that they are intended to be a starting point, a kind of guide that engenders discussion. And really, I think it starts there. It starts at a discussion level around, especially the question, what do we believe God is calling us to do? And that's probably not going to be resolved in one sitting. In fact, the story of the church in Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, I believe, is about how they focus their vestry on doing a Bible study at the beginning of each vestry meeting with that question as the central piece. What is God calling us to do? And over time, clarifying where and recognizing that their primary role is one of discernment. So,
some of the questions about, should the vestry have another vision? What about vestry of the whole? Is there a good percentage of vestry to congregation? I'm not that. No, the mission statement of the parish is the mission statement of the vestry. But you might want to look at your mission statement to make sure it describes what you do, and and if possible, describes what you do differently than other faith communities or other organizations in the neighborhood. Because sometimes the mission statements could be so broad that it could apply to any faith community in the neighborhood. So just take a look at that. I think what the vestry's role is to take that mission statement, assuming it's appropriate, and then look at the vision in terms of the future of the congregation. And that's how that's the consensus building process. There's a question from Vincent about how do we go and find out what the neighborhood needs? I mentioned the example of, going out and taking some pictures. Meeting with the local leaders. For example, if there is a neighborhood organization or a local councilman or alderman or whatever the local governing body, inviting the mayor to attend, part of your vestry meeting and say, what can we do? Surveys, going around and putting surveys under doors or knocking on doors and say, can you come to a community meeting? Hosting a local, potluck dinner and said, we at St. Paul's want to be involved in our community. It's interesting. We have a fellowship partners program. We had a fellow who was assigned to start a Latino congregation in Massachusetts, and before he had his first worship service, he basically went around the neighborhood to find out what their needs were. Again, there are different ways of doing it, and it's very contextual. It's very localized. But you'd be surprised how people are going to say, gee, I've lived across the street from this church for 20 years, and this is the first time anyone has ever knocked on my door and asked me what I think. Yes, our community is church saturated, and that is, and that's why you have to kind of sometimes think, how are you unique? The secular approach would be, what is our market niche? So what is the difference between the Episcopal Church in your community versus the Methodist, the Baptist, whatever? And it may be that we are an open and affirming, welcoming community. It may be that we have, we combine the rich liturgical traditions of the broader church. It may be that we are the church that you'll always find a home here. It may be that we focus on pastoral care. It may be that we have a special outreach to the neighborhood. But it's important that any church in any community is able to articulate what difference would it make if we weren't here tomorrow. I mean, that's a very interesting question to ask yourself. If you shut your doors or your church were torn down or burned to the ground tomorrow, God forbid, what difference would it make? And these are very interesting questions.
And I think we need to move on. That's the whole thing. If we're going to make it before 8. So.
Okay. The next component of being a mission-based vestry is strengthening leadership capacity. And there are three areas of that: identifying and recruiting new leaders, granting responsibility and being open to change, and offering ongoing feedback and support. And let me go on to some of these in a little more detail. One of my pet peeves, and I'll come up front, is that we really don't help people discern their gifts. And I think in identifying and recruiting new leaders, you don't go to somebody on their second Sunday. The first Sunday you give them a pledge card. The second Sunday you ask them to serve on the vestry. You have a meeting with somebody and say, gee, you've been coming here for a while. Could we have a cup of coffee or lunch, or sit in the corner during coffee hour and have a conversation about, why do you come here? Or what are you passionate about? Or what are some of your gifts and interests? And then, maybe the third time you have a conversation with them, you ask them, where do you think you might plug in here? I was saying earlier, you want to identify leaders who are drawn to the mission and vision of the congregation. So if you ask them, why do you come to St. Paul's? And they'll say, I come to St. Paul's because I feel welcome here, and I really like the fact that St. Paul's is connected to the neighborhood. Leaders are busy. The old adage, if you want something done, ask a busy person. If you connect with someone's passions and interests, they're going to say yes. I mean, we all know, we're all busy people, but if we're asked to do something that we're really excited about or we're really interested in, we're going to say yes. The other thing is leaders make commitments and follow through. The worst thing you can say, ask someone, you want to be on the vestry, it's only one meeting a month. And if people, that's not the way to sell vestry or any kind of leadership position. I know sometimes we feel desperate for members, but if we could only find 3 or 5 people, back to the question of what is the right ratio, it's the number of people who you can find who are committed to the long-term health and vitality of the congregation. And it may be 3, it may be 5. There's nothing magical about 12 or 15. It's the core group of people who you feel have the commitment to move that community forward. And getting the right people on the bus. That's okay. Move to the next slide. I'm sorry. It's really, one of the things that the experts will say, and this is Jim Collins' Good to Great. You might know that book. He has one that's for nonprofits. And his basic premise is if you get the right people on the bus, you can drive it anywhere. This is the way I built my staff team here at ECF. We clearly had, we articulated our mission about, strengthening leadership and financial capacity. We articulated our vision that we hope through our work we have a growing number of healthy, vital, vibrant congregations. Then I got the right people on the bus. People with talents, skills, commitment to mission, able to articulate a vision, team players, people who were faithful to the church and faithful to the organization. And then we decided what we wanted to do. And that's kind of how you discern leaders on the vestry. You get people with a broad sense of their own faith journeys, a broad sense of why this faith community is important, a sense of connection to the mission. And then you say, okay, folks, what is God calling us to do and how to get there? This is crucial. You need to delegate responsibility and not tasks. Now, sometimes we just need people to get things done. After a potluck, it's like, can somebody stay 5 minutes and clean up the hall? But, we often talk about burnout in the, especially in small congregations. I think one of the reasons why we have burnout is that we give people tasks and not responsibility. Let me give you a classic example. You go to a person and say, can you lead a youth group that meets on Sunday nights from 6 to 8 and has pizza and then discussion and we'll do board games? Or you say, can you put a group of people together to come up with some ideas on how we can serve the youth of this congregation and the youth of the neighborhood, and come back and let me know what I can do to help? Now, what do you think is a much more dynamic way of engaging somebody in the life of the community? Is it saying, do you want to do something on Sunday night, or do you want to help discern what we might do to address the needs of young people in this parish? The other is say yes. People might come and say, what we really want to do is, go out in the community, knock on doors, and ask young people what they might want from the church. And you as the rector or the leadership team or the wardens may not necessarily think that makes a whole lot of sense, but you want to affirm and say yes to people and encourage them to try new things, even if they may fail. We don't like to fail, and we all learn more from our mistakes than our successes. The other is being open to change and don't sweat the small stuff, because there may be major issues when you need to sweat. But when you want to engage people in leadership, you want to give them leeway with appropriate oversight and direction. There's Tina Fey has this cute thing about saying yes, and you'll get the slides, but that's kind of a nice way of summarizing what I'm trying to say. The other thing is you have to provide ongoing feedback and support. And, often in the Episcopal Church and in churches generally, we're afraid to evaluate people. And feedback is different than evaluation because people need feedback on an ongoing basis. And feedback is focusing on what are some of the challenges, what can I do to make you more effective? We have this concept of ministry reviews and the whole the annual evaluation, and more I think that's less and less effective than giving someone ongoing feedback. For example, you have a major event on a Friday night or youth event, and then you may gather and say, okay folks, what went well, what didn't go as well, what could we have done differently, what as the rector or the warden or the leadership team, what can I do to make this more effective the next time? Ongoing feedback, and especially for younger people. The experts will say when you are dealing with younger people, and whether they're members of your staff or members of your congregation, it's much more effective to provide that instantaneous ongoing feedback than go into some elaborate evaluation process 6 months later. Here's some questions, and I'm not going to read them because we're kind of running out of time, but here's some questions you might want to think about on how you provide feedback. And what is constructive criticism and what is just kind of damaging? And we all know kind of damaging comments that are made in public that belittle and hurt people and often will lead to conflict that's irreconcilable. But constructive criticism goes back to that how did you think that particular session went? Did you think it went well? And if you do it in the right manner, people will recognize, no, I could have done a little better. Well, what could I do to make that more effective? And this is anything from a social event to a youth event to a major capital campaign. So these are some questions you might want to look at. I want to leave some time for questions or ideas or best practices or, and I don't know if Miguel and Brendan, you picked up some things that, that came up during my presentation.
There's a really nice comment from Roy Hayes, which I think merits some attention. He says, one thing we've done is to separate Vestry members from specific tasks to be done. People that are passionate about some facet of church management do not have to be on the Vestry.
That summarizes the entire presentation, Roy. Thank you. No, it's clear. Vestry service is a unique calling to people in the congregation who, as we said, are committed to this notion of mission, vision, strategy, spiritual development. And the way we do that is through a thoughtful, prayerful discernment process, engaging people in one-on-one conversations about their passions. And, it's interesting. The other thing we may want to do, and it may be that the person who is an accountant may not want to do numbers on the church. That person may want to work with, young people at risk in the neighborhood. And, and asking the kindergarten teacher to teach Sunday school may be the last thing he or she wants to do. And that's why we need to, through a discernment process, not only do we identify new leaders, but we help avoid burnout. Because one of the reasons why people burn out in any leadership position, or even in their jobs, is because they're doing things that they don't feel they're either good at or they're called to do. And people who are involved in church communities want to make a difference, but most of those people want to do something that they're not doing in their 9-to-5 job, or they want to be fulfilled in an area that speaks to them, especially as they embark on their faith journeys. Other questions or ideas that came up or now?
A few people are typing. I think one of the other, there's a lot of interesting points in Roy's comment is just that vestries are not representative bodies, and going back to last time in the sense of
they're not representative bodies in that, you want them to reflect the kind of the congregation, but you're not on the vestry to be the representative from the choir or the representative from the altar guild. You're not like members of Congress who are representing their constituencies. And the classic example going on right now is this whole debate over gun control, where even Democrats in kind of conservative states are not supporting it because they're representing their constituents. As a vestry member, you don't represent a certain interest group. In fact, if you were singing in the choir for the last 20 years, when you joined the vestry, you have to put that bias aside and look at the long-term health of the community. Yes, two churches working together. That's the other thing. Partnering with other congregations. For example, if there is a need for feeding ministry, you might want to talk to the Methodist Church or the Baptist Church or the other Episcopal Church. How can we work together to meet the hunger needs of this community, especially if you're a small congregation? Back to the notion of not having to be all things to all people and maximizing resources. 3 or 4 congregations working together can get a lot more done. Or youth programs. I was speaking with leaders of a congregation, a small congregation, and said, our young people come to worship with us on Sunday mornings, but then they go over to the Baptist church on Sunday nights to be with their friends for youth group. And I said, isn't that wonderful? Isn't it wonderful that your young people want to be with you during the important worship time in the morning, but that the Baptist church does a much better job of youth group because they have resources and staff? There's nothing wrong with that. This was a small congregation who did not have the resources to have their own youth group, but it was the best of both worlds. Their young people were worshiping with them on Sunday morning and engaging in an ecumenical experience with their friends on Sunday evening. Vincent, that's another example. 3 Episcopal churches hiring a full-time youth person. You might want to look at sharing custodial staff and secretarial staff and, buildings and grounds costs and snow plowing. We need to look at new models of collaboration.
I think,
Well,
David, if I could just, Brendan, David's comment is really, I think, significant, which is being very honest about the commitment levels that is required for being on a vestry. There is a leadership expert, Ella Alkenklaus, who works in the Episcopal Church, who has a really wonderful comment about this, which is oftentimes in terms of vestry service, we try to lessen the amount of commitment that we ask of people, when in fact we should actually be doing the exact opposite, which is making sure that commitment is worthwhile. So not lessening the commitment, actually saying it's going to be hard, and it's the difficulty is worthwhile because we're doing something amazing and in fulfillment of God's mission in the world.
But once you get those people on, the vestry meetings have to be meaningful, and that's why you have to make it a worthwhile experience. Because if you're going to just say, will you be on the vestry, and the vestry has no beginning, middle, and end, and no real purpose, people don't want to join that. If you say, we're struggling with these issues, we don't have all the answers, but we are trying to be a dynamic, team of people who are trying to discern God's call to our congregation and struggle with some of the issues and challenges of being the Episcopal Church in this time and place. And we would love you to be part of that conversation and part of that journey. That is an honest way of engaging somebody. And you can say, yes, we have some financial needs, we have some buildings and grounds needs, and we're trying to deal with those. But when we gather as a vestry, we mostly focus on issues of mission and vision and what God is calling us to do. And we want you to be part of that conversation. That's compelling. And as I said earlier, if, we all find time for things that are interesting and compelling, and for things that, I don't have a whole lot of time to clean the bathroom, but I have a lot of time to spend quality time with friends over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and deepen my own personal experience and my own enrichment. And that's the way we have to sell vestry service, and that's the way we have to structure our vestry meetings so that people find fulfillment and meaning by being on the vestry, which is an incredibly important ministry.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out and taking the time this evening to attend this web conference. We just want to quickly share a few resources for you that can help you and your vestry in its mission and service. The first is the Vestry Resource Guide, so your one-stop shop for all things vestry related, with various resources and suggested Bible studies and exercises that you can use with your vestry. For those of you who may not be familiar with ECF Vital Practices, that includes the publication of vestry papers, which went digital in 2010, along with our vital posts, our tools and resources, and this features a collection of wonderful, wonderful resources for your vestry and for leaders in congregations. So please check out ecfvp.org. You can register, click on register to subscribe to receive vestry papers and our mid-month digest. And finally, the Manual for Church Business Methods is the very comprehensive resource for all things finances. This is put together by the Finance Office of the Episcopal Church. Again, you can copy that link down or Google that. And this is for those pesky things when it comes to finances. May take a little digging, but you'll definitely be able to find the information that you need in there. And of course, please feel free to contact our ECF Leadership Resources team, Miguel Escobar, who was with us this evening, myself, and Nancy Davidge, who is the editor of ECF Model Practices. And again, we want to thank you. Thank you, Donald, for your presenting this evening, and we wish you all a lovely, lovely and blessed evening.
Thank you. Charles had, I'm seeing Charles's note. Charles had an interesting question earlier about combining the struggle of combining vestry and council. As you might remember, he's part of the Episcopal Lutheran congregation.
Yeah, and I'd love to have further conversations with Charles. Let's make sure let's make sure we're in touch, because I think there's some really dynamic possibilities, and we'd love you to work with you on that. And you probably be more of a resource than we are, but combining the best of both polities and maybe eliminating the worst would be a very nice way of doing that. So please be in touch with Miguel, and we can kind of have more further conversations.
I'll be in touch, yeah.
It also would be helpful if people, these are generally an hour long. If people would like these to be a little longer and maybe a little more interactive, let us know that as well, because part of it is, we're very conscious of the fact that people's time is precious, and sometimes being in front of a computer screen for a long time isn't, could be a little tedious.